Science of Shopping by Paco Underhill. Mr. Underhill spent 2 decades researching consumer behavior patterns, detailing over 900 specific aspects of the buyer-seller relationship. This discussion is at a Barnes & Noble bookstore in the Chelsea section of Manhattan. It lasts a little over an hour.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining us. Our guest this evening is author and retail consultant Paco Underhill. Mr. Underhill has documented how people have shopped for such clients such as Levi Strauss, Starbucks, and McDonald's, to name a few. In his new book, Why We Buy: The Science of Shopping, it explains how working women have altered the way supermarkets are laid out, how men are learning to shop like women, and why the internet will not replace them all. I'd like you to please welcome Paco Underhill.
I often introduce myself by saying that I'm a refugee from the world of academia. Almost 20 years ago, I used to teach as a part-time adjunct instructor in a doctoral program in environmental psychology. After one particularly obstreperous seminar, I decided that I felt the same way about teaching as I did about sex, which is that I'd rather practice my profession than talk about practicing my profession. I am by training an urban geographer, and I spent the early part of my career on the roofs of buildings watching how people move on streets. I was lucky enough in my early years to work with William White, the eminent American urbanist who died earlier this year, and to whose credit there is a bookshelf of works here in Barnes & Noble that have profoundly altered the way in which many of us who love cities and are interested in people think. I was part of the research crew that would go around to different cities and rewrite commercial zoning ordinances. I was the junior member of the crew, and one of my responsibilities used to be to go up on the roofs of buildings and install the time-lapse Super 8 cameras that we used back in the early 70s to record traffic patterns and pedestrian patterns on the street. I had my moment of epiphany on the roof of the Seafirst Bank building in Seattle. As you probably noticed, I'm tall. When I played my 1 year of intramural college basketball at that powerhouse Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, they listed me at 6'5". Now that I've lost my hair, I'm probably closer to 6'3". But I still tend to get height sick with 2 pairs of socks on. On the roof of the Seafirst Bank building in Seattle, the building had a 4-inch sway factor, so that in a high wind, the building would move in the breeze. As I leaned down over the edge, installing my cameras, looking down some 60 floors, I realized that I'd rather be in piranha-infested rivers than doing the job that I did. I was scared. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a bank here in New York City, the Lincoln Savings Bank on 48th Street, getting madder by the moment, and realized that the same tools that I'd been using to look at what makes a good street, or how does somebody use a bus stop, or what the dynamics of a taxi stand are, that I could take those tools inside a store and start to look at what made a good store. Unlike many of the people who work here at Barnes & Noble, who came to retailing through some love of books and at least some marginal interest in commerce, I got into my job simply by fear. If 20 years ago you'd asked me whether I'd be asked, what the implications of drive-throughs are in the 21st century, or to look at the dynamics of how women shop cosmetics, I probably would have asked what insane asylum you had escaped from. It's been quite a ride. The tools that we'd evolved, we still use today. We go into stores, install small video cameras, and actually record what people do. At the same time that our cameras are running, we put in store something that we call a tracker, which is somebody who physically and visually picks up a shopper as they enter a door or enter an aisle and simply follows them through their shopping process. We may also add an interview to that same person that we've taped and followed. The exercise here isn't one of trying to look at what you do, but the issues of what do you do as compared to what you do as compared to what somebody else does. We are a tribal species, and that part of the key to understanding what we do is, in effect, understanding something about our tribal behavior. It's now 1999, almost 20 years since I sort of stepped off that boat and looked at the wonderful world of retail. I like to think that I've gone from benignly ignorant to dangerously ignorant in 20 years. Last year, from our offices in New York, Sao Paulo, Sydney, and Milan, we followed either in real life or on tape somewhere between 50 and 70,000 people through their shopping or banking process. We recorded somewhere between 15 and 20,000 hours of some of the most profoundly boring videotape you have ever seen. We've tried to take the tools of 20th century anthropology, and rather than focus them on a marketplace in Papua New Guinea, focus them on us. I'm part of an industry that is troubled by issues in invasion of privacy. Somebody who's involved in the net or direct marketing has the ability to take any one person in this audience, find out what their name, telephone number, address, income, driving history, criminal record, any number of other issues that I think influence that invasion of privacy issue. I have been called a supermarket spy, which is a moniker which I somewhat resent. We have, over the past 20 years, charted some of the evolution of what's happened to us. 20 years ago, when I got started looking at a store like this, we used a series of very simple measures. What were the number of people who walked in a door that actually bought something? How many people walked in a bookstore and actually made it to the art section? What was the impact of having psychology next to children's books? How many books did somebody actually handle? How often did a book have to be handled before it was sold? I'll tell you, it's enough to make anybody in the book-selling business shop with rubber gloves on. It's now been interesting because over this 20-year period, we have collected a volume of information from our series of very simple 10 measurements done some 20 years ago. I think by last count, we have some 900 different ways of looking at how we as Homo sapiens across the first world shop. It's curious, though, that in our work there are a series of issues that keep coming up with virtually every single job that we do. And I think they're issues that are very evocative of where we are going as people. Probably the first and foremost issue that we have to address is the changing status of women. One of the things that we know is that the 20th century engine of marketing, as it relates to gender, while it still works, it doesn't work anywhere near as well as it used to. There was some magic moment, for example, in the selling of cars when all of a sudden makeup mirrors turned up on the driver's side of Jeep Cherokees. There was something profound in our data of watching the number of fathers do the grocery shopping increase with each passing year. Virtually everybody I know of my generation practices either safe sex or birth control. I think we've stepped away from biology. The women of the 21st century, while they certainly may not, are conscious of the fact that they may not have made the progress that they should or might or would like to, they have had a profound change on our structure as a society. I think there's a joke that I've heard that in the men's locker rooms across the country, one of the buzzing whispers has been that if first world women continue to progress at the rate that they have, that particularly us American men are well on our way to becoming exotic household pets. The second issue, which is linked to the first, is the changing status of our families. The old Ozzie and Harriet model of how we shop and who does what has profoundly changed. If we look at simply the value structure that a shopper brings to a supermarket based on the nature of their trip, whether they're shopping for their family in the typical Saturday morning or whether they're shopping on a mission to produce one meal or shopping for a significant event, it alters what they do on the floor. The truth is that in American shopping going into the 21st century, if we look at a supermarket, some 60 to 70% of everything that we buy, we had no intention of buying walking in the door. What this has meant is that the simple marketing war that has been perpetuated over the 21st century, of whether it's Chrysler competing with Ford, or Coke competing with Pepsi, or Barnes & Noble competing with B. Dalton, has in effect turned from a nice, neat marketing war, I would argue, to a profound bar fight, where everybody is in pursuit of the customer's discretionary expenditure. That changing role in family has had a profound impact on who we are and what we are. The third issue, and this is something is a battle that I fight with virtually every client, is the issue of visual acuity. I am 47. My eyes at 47 function very differently than somebody who's 25. My corneas are yellowed. It takes my eyes longer to adjust to changing light. And yet if I go to the design studios, whether they're in Silicon Alley, here in New York, or in the fashionable Bria district in Milan, most of the people sitting at the CAD CAM screens doing the actual work are generally under age 30. And frankly, their eyes work differently than yours and mine do. This doesn't mean that we have to lobby for everything to be designed for granny and grandpa, but it does mean that we are missing, whether it's in the context of our retail experience or in the context of a package design, a true consciousness of how our changing pattern of visual acuity affects the way we live. I would argue no one is going to go broke going into the 21st century, assuming that a lot of us either should be wearing our glasses and aren't, or should have had our prescriptions checked 6 months, if not 2 years ago. The next issue, which I think comes up in virtually every job, and is certainly very poignant here in New York City, is that the U.S. has become the shopping capital to the world. I can remember standing in a Tower Records in Boston and watching a young French student bring a CD up to a security guard and ask the simple question, will this CD work on my CD player in France? And you could see the security guard sort of looking at him going, man, don't you know all of these are made in the Dominican Republic? The point being here is that I know that that young man probably stood in Fnac in Les Halles in Paris 2 weeks earlier, shopped that identical CD at twice the price. If I go in to Rinascente in Milan, a fancy department store, and I find a jacket that I wanted to buy, I can pay for that jacket in any one of the world's currencies. If I walk into a restaurant in Paris, even at two stars, I am presented a menu in at least 5 different languages. I challenge you to walk into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame on Hudson Street in New York, which attracts a huge volume of German tourists, and ask for a German menu. Or to walk in to Saks and try to pay for a perfume purchase with Japanese yen. One of the questions that we are being asked over and over again, whether it's by retailers or consumer product manufacturers, is the simple issue of where are we leaving money on the table? How can we look at the nature of how our stores work or how our products are presented that in a sense gives us a fighting chance for our piece of the customer's discretionary expenditure. One of the issues which we all face is that I think I could live the rest of my life on vegetables, fruit, pasta, olive oil, and wine, only I don't plan to. Living here in New York as I shop, I have to think about what I buy, and what comes in the front door is going to push something else out the back door of where I live. We are part of a changing culture. Our relationship to consumption has changed. The way we visit a store or a shopping mall has changed. Historically, for example, I would argue that the birth or the explosion in the regional shopping mall was linked to our movement as a society from an urban setting to a suburban setting. We as people need to see other people. We have been going to the marketplace since we were hunters and gatherers. The regional shopping mall offered that young baby boomer mother a chance to be able to go someplace sheltered and safe and to see other people. We need to see and be seen by other people. And that's part of the reason why we've always gone to the market, not just to acquire. It is the reason why stores like Barnes & Noble have built cafes like we have here, which we call the third place. What's changed, though, is as women have come into the marketplace in force and have gone into jobs, then the nature of their social needs and where they go to satisfy those social needs has changed. I don't know about you, but I've never asked my best buddy to come bathing suit shopping with me. On the other hand, where we are and what we are today matters. And that as I go through a store or as I go through a bank, there are a series of issues that simply make me angry. They're angry because somebody hasn't thought about some often very profoundly simple issues. From our library now of some 250,000 hours worth of tape, I've extracted just a few bon mots here to share with you. I'd like to set them up now. The first thing that we're going to look at is a mother and her son walking in the door. And the son is simply, would you pause it for me, please, is going, no way, Jose, am I going to walk into that store. One of the pieces of advice that I am giving to virtually every store manager is that they need to keep a skateboard in the back room. And that periodically, maybe once a month or every 6 weeks, they need to sit on that skateboard and simply roll through their stores. They need to see the way a store looks like from the vantage point of a 4 or a 5-year-old. The point is here is that we as a culture are taking our kids with us. There is a very upscale jewelry store on Long Island where an average purchase gets into 5 figures. And on Saturday and Sunday, they put out a table of toys and bagels. That's not seen as an amenity, it's seen as a marketing tool. Whether you're here in a bookstore and understanding, for example, that if I look at a children's section, there are parts of a children's section that are meant to be merchandised to kids, and they're part of a children's section that are meant to be merchandised to adults. I had a chance to take the executive board at a very prominent toy store through their store, and I asked them to crawl through and simply look at what that vantage point was. Kids are part of our landscape, whether we're talking about a supermarket, or we're talking about a bookstore, or we're talking about a design showroom. Would you roll it, please? Now watch what happens here. Is that the mother walks in, and do you think she's a comfortable shopper with her son harassing her from the window? I love this sequence here, which is a dad and his child shopping an end cap at a supermarket. Freeze it for me, please. What mom carries their kid around on their shoulders, rips open the box of Oreos and hands them up and tolerates cookie crumbs draped through their heads? On the other hand, part of what we know in terms of the world of shopping is that dads are much less experienced saying no. And anything that adds to the collective pleasure of a dad and his kids on the floor of a grocery store, I would argue, is profoundly good. Next clip, please. Freeze it for me, please. I think it is interesting as we sit here in Chelsea, New York, perhaps one of the most concentrated, densely packed places of fashion-forward men on the East Coast. I cannot go in to a Rite Aid or a Duane Reade and find a men's health section. There is no place that is geared to selling products to me to make me look and take care of myself well. This is a department store in Canada, and we're watching a man, his wife, and his two kids shop a skincare section. Please, I think we need the Harley Davidson sunscreen. At 47, I've had the first pieces of melanoma cut off my body. I finally learned that sunscreen isn't wimpy, it's good health. Here in Chelsea, we need to push those boundaries. We need to think of us as men as creatures that also need preservation going into the 21st century, if only as exotic household pets. Roll it, please. You can watch him on the tape, and he's pointing to the problem areas in his face. Yeah. I'm getting crow's feet here. watch as this senior couple desperately try to read the tags, the price tags and unit pricing in a supermarket shelf. Freeze it for me, please. One of the issues I think is interesting is that we have watched the level of label reading and nutritional reading increase with each passing year. And we can link that directly to zip code in the sense that the higher the income, the greater the education, the more likely we are to find people reading labels. What is interesting is that we'll go to a cereal section in an upscale neighborhood of Minneapolis, and we'll have people poring over the nutritional content of the 947th box of Cheerios that they've acquired over the course of their lives. Part of what this has meant here, again, is the understanding the role of packaging in that information process that leads to the decision to buy this as opposed to that. Roll it, please. It's also been interesting to track here the nature of what the social interaction is between people in the shopping process. Freeze it for me, please. There are many senior couples now that do their grocery shopping together. And with each purchase is a certain amount of often very poignant debate. In this sequence here, we have a Generation X couple. He has found a shirt that he'd like to buy. And what she's asking for is, again, a poignant lesson in terms of that visual acuity and good consumership, which is she's asking, what is it made of? And how do you take care of it? And the profound question of, is your joy in buying it, or are you actually going to wear it? Roll it, please. I have pleaded with the senior executives at many major apparel chains to somehow permanently ban 9-point type forever on washing instructions. You can see she's put on her glasses, trying to read that label on the inside that says whether it's made out of rayon or it needs to be dry cleaned. This is something else which I found sad, which is somebody hasn't thought through the process of who is shopping for what product. Here is a middle-aged woman shopping on her knees. I'm very proud of the fact in our work with the cosmetics industry and drugstores that we have succeeded in getting cosmetics sold to the 40 and older woman off the floor and up to eye level with the simple logic that, hold it for me please, that if I'm selling to teens, it doesn't matter where I put it on the rack, they'll find it. This is a battery section at Kmart. Over half the cars on the road today are owned and operated by women. And there's not a single auto aftermarket that focuses on how do I help the woman driver acquire all of those auto aftermarket items with confidence. The point is here is that if I look at the conversion ratio of women shopping batteries or windshield wipers, it is significantly higher than the conversion ratio of men. They are coming in with a dedicated purpose. It's been very interesting to track the impact of women on the sale of technology. For example, in selling of computers and printers, that we are seeing women come to the rack more interested in not how it does it, but what it does. It's the difference, for example, in a hardware store of someone coming in and buying a drill and someone coming in and buying holes. We have struggled here, whether it's with with many of our mass merchandisers with the simple ideas that if I can succeed in giving women the purchase confidence to buy their own batteries or to buy their own windshield wipers, that customer is already in the store. Again, it's the process of trying to take somebody back to the point of sale and in effect walk them back through the troubles that a consumer is having buying. Roll it, please. We fought greatly with one of the large gasoline stations because they had taken away the washing for hands, and that part of what we saw is women often struggling with the smell of gasoline. I also argued that the simple concept that if you positioned a gas station chain as having bathrooms that were cleaned every 45 minutes, that might be a much more profound marketing strategy than the cost of what the cost of regular gasoline was. I love this sequence here, which is at a women's apparel store. Did you roll it? The couple walks in the door. The woman points the man to a chair and says, "You sit there. And while you're there, hold my bag." Freeze it for me, please. I believe profoundly in the role of seating. Thank you, Barnes & Noble, for having pioneered that to a certain extent in the retail world. Those chairs are not an amenity, they are a marketing tool. If you as a woman walk into a store and have a comfortable place to plant your significant other, you become an infinitely more effective shopper. Roll it, please. This is a clip that's now become sort of famous in our lexicon here, which is my father at age 78, for the first time in his life, is buying his own underwear. Up till this point, either his mother bought it for him, the U.S. Marine Corps provided it for him, his girlfriend bought it, or his wife. Finally, my mother has had enough and said, "Francis, go buy your own." Here's a man shopping in the underwear section, and he can't figure out what size he is. So he's reaching back and trying to read, what size am I? There's a truth here, which is that in terms of, freeze it for me, please, that if we look at just the shifting patterns of men and women, men tend to exhibit what I call hunter behavior, in the sense that they walk in the door often looking for one thing, and that if they can't find it reasonably quickly, they tend to bail. Whereas women are often much more interested in the act of gathering and extract some pleasure from that process. Therefore, if you're selling to men, you better make it damn easy for them to find. I resent the fact that as a tall man, small is at the top and extra large is at the bottom in the underwear display. Roll it, please. This is setting up the son advocating to the father. He finds what he wants. It's been merchandised at an appropriate height, and he goes, "Dad, this is what I want." And it is acquired. This is ethnicity issues here. If I I take virtually any major chain, be it a bookstore or the Gap, and I look at sales over a certain dollar figure. Let's say I'm looking at banana, and I'm looking at sales that are over $750. Virtually a significant portion of that sale is made to foreigners. And yet, I challenge you to walk into the Gap or even Old Navy down the street and find a signage conversion chart that is in some prominent location. Let's roll it, please. This is a a German grandfather who's come to the U.S. on business with a shopping list. He is willing to spend a significant amount of money. Part of the reason why we know he's European is that there's a certain reluctance to interact with product that we have. Europeans tend to often shop with their hands behind them, and it takes a little more effort to get them to actually pick up and touch, or as we call pet. Finally, somebody recognizes who he is, sees the level of meal ticket that he represents, comes out from behind the register and helps him through his shopping list. Freeze it for me, please. Shut me off. In that little sequence here, I think we also see a window into the future. That window into the future is understanding the nature of what the net means to retail. One of the things about why we buy the book is there's a chapter on the future of retail as it relates to the net. Part of what I argue with some conviction is that we cannot go into the future seeing the net as some form of separate entity. Part of what we are seeing is a seamless connection between, for example, the Gap, the Gap.com, and the Gap, the catalog. There represents in the net for us a profound series of synergies that solve a series of problems that retail faces. For example, if you'll allow me to talk about a different bookstore, at borders.com, you can go online, order a book, and pick it up at the store. If for some reason that book isn't what you thought it was, you can return it to the store for full credit. If I look at a typical supermarket, for example, I could almost draw a curtain across almost half of the store. Half of the supermarket gives us absolutely no pleasure to shop. Laundry soap, for example, I'm told that the shelf life of Tide is 7 years, okay? If I think of what would be the perfect grocery store of the 21st century, I think of our lovely market here at Union Square, where I can walk into that market, I can shop vegetables, fruit, cheese, wine, pretzels, talk to the person who made it. It is a wonderful experience in consumption. If I could only then stop at a cyber cafe attached to it and plug in my order so that the next Friday, 2 days hence, that I went to shop that market from my office on 20th Street, it would be all packed up and ready for me to go. I, like most New Yorkers, have a profound problem with delivery service. At OfficeDepot.com, I can go online and order and use the store as a delivery system, which means that for the store, they have the potential to shrink their footprint, wash out the staples that might be on the floor, no pun intended, and to, in effect, get closer to their customer base. The issue that I think is curious, and one that affects whether it's Barnes & Noble or whether it's our local supermarket or the Gap, is the simple issue is what happens to us and housing going into the 21st century. I thought it was very interesting that there's a apartment building across the street from Lincoln Center that now advertises that it is the only South Beach condo in walking distance of Avery Fisher Hall. Or that near our office in Sydney, the most popular and expensive apartment complex in very Tony Darling Point is one that has a supermarket on the first floor. Where we as aging baby boomers land is going to affect where we go. What happens to big box retail is something that's very, very much up in the air. I've come to believe in three things with messianic fervor. The first is that that Giving Goods Store is looking at the relationship or recognizing that there is a link between amenability and profitability. The degree to which you understand the needs of a consumer or a customer has a direct link in terms of your effectiveness as a retailer. Second is that Giving Goods Store or Giving Good Product is looking at the interrelationship between design, communication, and operations. And the progressive merchant is somebody who is always looking to tune those three functions. And finally, is that good stores and good products aren't created on a drawing board. They're not good marketing plans, don't necessarily succeed if they've been cooked in some high-rise conference room. I'm someone who believes profoundly in tactics, and that the way we build good stores and good products and good lives starts on the floor. I have had a remarkable ride over the past 8 weeks. This is a book that I think we thought would do well. It was written for people who either love or hate shopping. It was written in a way that almost anyone should be able to pick up this book, giggle, and see themselves in it. The book has many flaws, and I'm certainly conscious of it a year later. One only has to go on Amazon to see some of those flaws very poignantly pointed out. However, I have been absolutely astonished at the nature of the response to it. The book was officially published on the 13th of May. On the 13th of May, we were number 2 on Amazon's Hot 100. All across the country, as I've been on my book tour, I have found almost loving response at opposite ends of the spectrum, whether it's NPR or the New York Times, which treated those flaws extremely gently, to the out-of-town tabloids or the flagship of Polka Radio in the U.S., all of which have given us tremendous plugs. It's now my editor at Simon & Schuster called this evening to say that we are now in our 6th printing. And speaking as a bald, stuttering, nerdy, middle-aged geek. Thank you very much. I'm very flattered. I'm supposed to open up the floor for some questions here. Does anybody have something they'd like to ask? Why don't we start with you here? Yes, I want you to be.
I was wondering if I was wondering if you could talk more about the ethical dimensions of when a international retail chain comes over and redefines shopping such that suddenly you do buy 60 to 70% of your purchases without intending to. Okay. And specifically, you're talking a lot about women and how the things that you do empower them to shop more effectively or better. Isn't it also true that to shape the way women or anyone shape the way that they shop, then structures a large part of the way that they are?
Okay. She's asking about the moral implications of making the shopping experience more effective here. Let me answer that question two ways. I was in London less than a week ago, and the British press were going nuts over the fact that Walmart had just bought a major English chain, supermarket chain, that the pundits on Fleet Street tracking the stocks of Sainsbury and Tesco, the two major English supermarket chains, were going nuts because the share price had dropped 10%. They asked me what I thought Walmart's entry into the British market meant, and I felt it was fundamentally good news for the English consumer who pays too much for their product. We as American consumers pay less in terms of our weighted dollars for goods now than we ever have before. The cost of gasoline, the cost of beans, the cost of milk, the quality of what we purchase, from our cars even to our computers, has gone up. We have understood something, I think, which is profound in the world of marketing, is that most of us have gotten smarter. We've been manipulated, ripped off, and responded accordingly. One of the issues about the world of retail is that the same woman who's shopping at Bergdorf's in the morning may be shopping Sam's or Duane Reade in the afternoon. I think that is a smarter consumer. On the other side, there is no question that by putting goods out and making them accessible, we run the risk for certain individuals of their misusing that easy access. Shopping can be a sickness, and I think we have to address it as such. On the other hand, I think it's important that we as individuals recognize that we have responsibility for our own decisions, and that somehow to blame Filene's Basement down the street for aggressively pricing something as an excuse for our buying it, I don't think is where the blame actually lies. I think one of the things that we've learned is that value often isn't connected to price, and that buying up is often smarter, and that what I get some profound pleasure out of, and it certainly has fueled our business, has been the fact that those tools of marketing that were based on manipulation, while they still work with some people, I would argue that they're failing daily. Next question.
Yes. I observe in the wintertime too many shoppers come bundled up with their coats and scarves and hats. I can't understand how that can be a pleasurable shopping experience. It seems like it's a horror story. Wouldn't the merchandisers realize that if they can get the coats off these people, they'd spend more money and stay longer in the store?
Oh, I think that's profoundly true. And I think it's interesting that, for example, at Bloomingdale's today, when I first worked there 10 years ago, there was a coat check. But you had to be a veteran to know where the hell it was on the floor, okay? I would argue that there are a number of things that deal with that amenity function. One of the things that we found early in our career, just come on up here. I want to show you a couple of things. Would you step up on here? Yes, stand up, come right up here, and let me point out a couple of things. Okay. First issue is that as I put 3 books in his hand, he's effectively shut down as a shopper. That once his hands are full, it's over. One of the things I love about Old Navy down the street is they have their mesh bags, which are kind of fun to carry. Those little Red Riding Hood plastic baskets that you use here at Barnes & Noble, they're ugly. Get something new and sexy. Second. Thank you for being my attendee here. Is that for the most part, the world is right-handed. And it's infinitely easier for us to reach this way than it is for us to reach that way. And that therefore, as we look at the dynamics of a shelf or the dynamics of an aisle, there is a profound difference in terms of whether something is successfully merchandised to your right or to your left. And that in almost every aisle there's a dominant direction in which people move. Turn around, please. Okay. One of the things that we also know in terms of thinking about the differences between men and women is that men generally have more public areas of their body. If I map all of the places that somebody touches you, somebody who you are not intimate with through the course of a day, it's actually quite a bit of surface area. Whereas if I take a woman and map that same portion of her body, it tends to be much smaller. Most women have had the experience of being touched in a way that they feel is inappropriate in public. We have something which will probably go on my tombstone here, which is, it sounds better in French. We call it derrière brousse factor. In English, we call it butt brush theory, which is the reality that as somebody stands up at a counter or a display, the more likely they are to be brushed from the rear, the less likely they are to convert from a browser to a buyer. Thank you. I appreciate your coming up in front of this audience. Yes.
I actually write about online shopping for a living, so I might be slightly biased, but it seems to me that the web is going to be taking over a lot of the market of the brick and mortar store, and also changing our habits. Like the average buyer on the web buys, spends more money per purchase, etc. It's a huge topic. Can you just address some of these issues?
This is the issue again, of the impact of web shopping. For those of you who haven't seen the new issue of The Economist, it has a wonderful profile of the internet and business. Let me point out something here. The dominant things that are sold on the web today are music, books, porn, videotape, and stocks, okay? Things that have no touch, no feel, no texture. I would also argue that they are product segments where the connection between the manufacturer and the retailer has failed. In the sense that the music labels, for example, are still selling music the same way they did in 1950-57. And the labels are eminently closer to the artists than they are to the music-consuming public. I would argue the same thing is true in the bookstore business. One of the wonderful things that Amazon did was it let the book shopper in effect gain purchase confidence by getting information about the product that they were interested in. I can't tell you the battles that I've had with publishers trying to make a cover for a book retail friendly. And the issues here, I think, are interesting if we think about just selling books. Is that it isn't how a book looks this way. Once the book has gotten in my hands, it succeeds or fails on its own merit. When we think about packaging, it's often packaged in terms of what angles am I seeing it. I often take a bookstore manager, for example, and walk him outside and ask him to say, what does he see from there? I think as we get back to the web, though, what we're seeing is where things have touch and smell and taste and give us pleasure. We're looking at the degrees to which can the web truly impact or give the experience of it. And I think this is interesting. If we look at apparel, for example, I love the language that L.L. Bean has evolved in its catalog to describe touch. And they are incredibly sensuous about describing the touch and feel of a fabric. Or there's another catalog retailer called Territory Ahead, which puts out an attitude in terms of its clothes. I mean, this is the sweater that you wear on your trip to Baja California. The office thinks it's for 2 weeks, but you know it's forever. Okay? All right? But as we balance off these issues, I think the web does have a profound impact, and it is going to be used as a tool. The key to the web's future, though, is not the degree to which it's used by the Fortune 1000 companies, but the degree to which it becomes an operable, profit-making tool for companies from Fortune 1000 to Fortune 15,000. And the way it's used in a way that generates profits from the minute it starts, from the minute their investment in a server or space on a server is in some way solving an actual problem. One of the things we work with Compaq. There's a wonderful interview on their website, just posted, talking about, again, just that issue. There are certain companies that have the luxury of opening their doors and losing money forever. There are others that have the necessity of approaching the web and saying, how can I invest money in Q1 and get it in Q2? And the way it works, which is often in selling business to business, is where it is linked in and doesn't exist as a separate entity. We are part of an integrated world, and I welcome the web into it as a profound player. One more? Okay. Okay.
I hear a discrepancy between your evaluation of the contemporary adult consumer and what I see as the highly propagandized child from early on, well into teens and early 20s, well, child, so let's say 18. And I don't see how we're getting smarter if, in fact, we are so indoctrinating the young, because, yeah, okay.
I think that's a very valid and frightening issue here, which is certainly as you and I get older, I think experience makes us smarter. Though if we look at a hip kid at age 8, they are much more brand conscious and image conscious at age 8 than either you or I were at the same point. They're exposed to more media. But on the other hand, I also recognize that, you know, when we were teenagers, we were victims too, and it was part of that experience of being a victim of our culture, participating in our culture, or learning what our culture meant that made us the veterans that we are today. I think it's interesting, for example, in that same sense, is if we look at fashion in 1999, that much of fashion isn't dictated from Milan or Paris or New York. It comes up from the streets. You know, if I look at whether it's hard candy or other brands which have in effect risen out of renegade status to marketing prominence, I also want to give kids, while certainly they are barraged with stuff, I think my 8-year-old nephew is so much smarter at age 8 in terms of what makes sense in the world and is asking the right questions than I was at the same age.
Is he the exception or the rule?
I think he's both the exception and the rule. Let's have one more, and then we're calling it a day. Thank you for that.
The title of the book is Why We Buy, but one of the most interesting things that I found is why people don't buy. I actually, a few years ago, had created a product which I thought would be very successful based on a statistic from the United States Department of Justice. And what it did is it taught young children how to avoid basically child predators in a totally animated CD-ROM where they learn experiential. It was really, it's a groundbreaking type of thing. And what I found, though, is when I went to retailers, is that there was such a huge amount of denial on the issue with parents, oftentimes who were abused themselves, that it didn't matter how fun and how enticing the packaging was, that issue, that the fact that they were thinking about it during their shopping process, they closed down almost immediately. And the only way we were able to actually distribute it was actually through when people did news coverage, which we got a lot of news coverage on it, and people were open up to the issue, and then they would be open up to the product. Do you think something like that could be addressed in a retail environment? I mean,
I think we don't like to think about lots of stuff, whether it's, you know, atrocities in Bosnia, or the inequality of the sexes, or many of the profound issues of our culture. I think part of what is interesting there is, if the classic retail network fails you, that there are other networks to get it out. And I think one of the things that makes marketing interesting today is that our palette of choices is much broader than it's ever been before, whether it's over the net, okay, whether it's through hospitals, or whether it's through child abuse centers. If you have a product that makes sense, it's your challenge to find a way to get it out to the public. And if retailers don't buy it, there are other ways for you to work. And good luck on you. Anyway, thank you for coming this evening. I appreciate all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Underhill, and thank you all for joining us. The book is called Why We Buy, The Science of Shopping. If you're interested in getting your book signed, please come up through the center aisle and please exit to the right. Thank you again, and good night.
Paco Underhill has spent